Every parent should protect their child's dignity, but Anwyn's father chose to destroy hers instead. For 28 years, she had carried the weight of his disappointment and the village's cruel whispers about her appearance. When the fearsome Alpha King Rorik arrived in the cold northern village of Greyhill to collect tribute, no one expected the village drunk to shove his own daughter forward as payment. Her father's slurred words cut through the winter air. "Take my fat daughter, if you've got a taste for charity." The crowd laughed, expecting the king to turn away in disgust. But Anwyn didn't flinch. She stood straight-backed, meeting the Alpha King's steel-gray eyes without fear or apology. What happened next silenced every voice in that village square. Rorik stepped closer and spoke words that would echo through the kingdom. But why would the most powerful man in the realm see value where everyone else saw only shame? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the thatched roofs of Greyhill like a shroud, and Anwyn pulled her worn woolen cloak tighter as she made her way through the narrow cobblestone streets. Her leather satchel, patched and repatched over the years, bounced gently against her hip with each step. Inside, carefully wrapped bundles of dried herbs rustled softly, chamomile for the baker's wife's sleepless nights, willow bark for old Henrik's aching joints, and feverfew for the blacksmith's daughter who suffered from terrible headaches. At 28, Anwyn had become the village's unofficial healer, though she held no formal title and received little recognition for her work. The official healer, Master Aldrich, was nearing 70, and his hands had grown too unsteady for delicate work. He had quietly begun teaching her his craft, recognizing in her something the rest of the village seemed blind to: a natural gift for understanding the body's mysteries and the healing properties of plants. She paused outside the carpenter's cottage, where young Willem lay burning with fever. His mother, Marta, opened the door before Anwyn could knock, her face etched with worry and exhaustion. "Thank the saints you've come," Marta whispered, stepping aside to let her enter. "He's been calling for his father all night, but Edgar's been dead these 3 years." Anwyn knelt beside the small bed, where the boy tossed restlessly. His skin was hot to the touch, but dry, a dangerous sign. She had seen this fever before, the one that came with the changing seasons and claimed the weak if not treated properly. From her satchel, she withdrew a small vial of tincture she had prepared the night before, combining elderflower with a touch of mint and honey. "Lift his head," she instructed gently, measuring careful drops onto a wooden spoon. The boy's eyes fluttered open at the touch of the cool medicine on his lips, and Anwyn spoke to him in the same soothing tone she remembered her mother using long ago. "There now, Willem. This will help the fire in your blood settle. Your mother is here, and she loves you very much." As the medicine took effect and the boy's breathing eased, Marta gripped Anwyn's hand. "How do you do it? How do you always know exactly what they need?" Anwyn smiled softly, packing her supplies away. "My mother used to say that healing isn't about knowing everything, it's about listening carefully to what the body is trying to tell you." The mention of her mother brought the familiar ache to Anwyn's chest. Elena had died when Anwyn was 14, succumbing to the same wasting sickness that had claimed many that harsh winter. Before her death, Elena had spent countless hours teaching her daughter about herbs and healing, passing down knowledge that had been handed from mother to daughter for generations. "Your worth isn't measured by what others see on the outside," Elena had whispered during her final days, her once strong hands now frail as bird bones. "It's measured by the goodness you put into the world and the lives you touch with kindness." But after Elena's death, Anwyn's father, Gareth, had changed completely. The jovial blacksmith, who had once sung while he worked, became a bitter, angry man who sought solace in ale and blamed his daughter for surviving when his beloved wife had not. The villagers, taking their cue from his obvious disappointment, began to treat Anwyn as an afterthought, someone to be pitied rather than valued. She's got her mother's skill, they would whisper when they thought she couldn't hear. But what good is that in a girl who'll never find a husband? Poor Gareth. Stuck with a daughter who eats like a horse and looks like one too. The cruel words had cut deep in her younger years. But time had taught Anwyn to armor herself with purpose. If she could not be beautiful in their eyes, she would be useful. If she could not inspire love, she would inspire gratitude through her. Healing touch. Walking back through the village square, she noticed the unusual activity around the tavern. Merchants were securing their goods. Mothers were calling their children inside earlier than usual, and clusters of men spoke in hushed, urgent tones. The weathered stone monument in the center of the square, a simple pillar marking the village's founding, seemed to draw worried glances from passers-by. "What's happening?" Anwyn asked Thomas, the baker, as he hurriedly loaded the last of his bread into his cart. "King's men were spotted on the northern road," he replied, not meeting her eyes. "The Alpha King himself is coming to collect tribute. Should be here by midday tomorrow." Anwyn felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. King Rorik was legendary throughout the northern kingdoms of Bay, warrior who had united the fractured lands through conquest and cunning. Stories of his battles were told around every hearth, tales of a man who could face 20 enemies and emerge victorious, whose very presence could silence a roomful of arguing nobles. "They say he's coming to assess our loyalty," Thomas continued, lowering his voice. "After what happened in Westmere, the king wants to make sure every village remembers where their allegiance lies." Westmere had fallen to rebellion 6 months ago, and the king's response had been swift and decisive. The village still stood, but its leadership had been completely replaced, and heavy tributes now flowed to the royal coffers. It was a reminder that the Alpha King's patience had limits. As Anwyn made her way home to the small cottage she shared with her father, she found him already deep in his cups despite the early hour. Gareth sat slumped at their rough wooden table, staring into his tankard with the hollow expression she had grown accustomed to over the years. "The king comes tomorrow," she said quietly, hanging her cloak on its peg by the door. Gareth looked up with bloodshot eyes. "Aye, and what tribute can a poor blacksmith offer a king? My best work goes to pay for this." He raised his tankard in a mocking salute. "Perhaps I'll offer him my greatest burden instead." The words stung, but Anwyn had learned long ago not to respond to his cruel remarks when he was drinking. Instead, she busied herself preparing a simple meal of bread and soup, moving quietly around the small space that had been her world for as long as she could remember. That night, as her father snored loudly in his chair, Anwyn sat by the dying fire and thought about her mother's teachings. Elena had believed that every person had a purpose, a unique gift to offer the world. But as Anwyn looked around their humble cottage, with its patched walls and meager furnishings, she wondered what gift she could possibly have that would matter to anyone beyond the borders of Greyhill. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters and carrying with it the promise of change. Tomorrow would bring the Alpha King to their village, and with him, a reckoning that none of them could avoid. Anwyn pulled her mother's old shawl around her shoulders and whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening, asking not for glory or recognition, but simply for the strength to face whatever tomorrow might bring with the same dignity. Her mother had taught her to value above all else. The thunder of hooves announced the arrival long before the riders appeared. Anwyn stood with the other villagers in the square, her heart beating steadily despite the nervous energy that crackled through the crowd like lightning before a storm. She had risen early to help tend to Mrs. Aldrich's arthritis and young Willem's lingering fever, but now all thoughts of healing were pushed aside by the magnitude of what was about to unfold. The Alpha King's war banner came into view first at deep crimson field, bearing the golden wolf's head that had become synonymous with absolute power throughout the northern kingdoms. The fabric was battle-worn, bearing the scars of countless campaigns. Yet it flew with undiminished pride. Behind it rode a column of mounted warriors, their armor gleaming despite the mud of the road, their faces hard with the confidence of men who had never known defeat. And at their head rode King Rorik himself. Even from a distance, his presence was unmistakable. He sat his massive destrier with the easy grace of a man born to command, his broad shoulders encased in mail that had clearly seen real battle. His dark hair, streaked with early silver, was pulled back from a face that bore the weathered lines of 35 years of warfare and leadership. But it was his eyes that truly marked him as different steel-gray orbs that seemed to take in everything at once, missing no detail, weighing every face in the crowd with the calculated assessment of a predator. Village Elder Anwyn stepped forward, his ceremonial robes trembling slightly in the morning breeze. The old man had governed Greyhill for 20 years, but faced with the Alpha King's presence, he seemed suddenly small and frail. "Your Majesty," Anwyn began, his voice carrying across the silent square, "Greyhill welcomes you. We have prepared. The tribute is requested, and we pledge our continued loyalty to the crown." Rorik dismounted with fluid motion, his boots striking the cobblestones with authority. Up close, he was even more imposing, tall enough that most men had to crane their necks to meet his gaze, with the kind of lean, muscular build that spoke of a lifetime spent wielding sword and shield. Yet there was something else about him, something that went beyond mere physical presence. He radiated the kind of quiet confidence that came from knowing he was the most dangerous man in any room. He entered. "Loyalty," Rorik repeated, his voice carrying easily across the square, despite its measured tone. A simple word, yet so often misunderstood. "Tell me, Elder, what does loyalty mean to the people of Greyhill?" Anwyn cleared his throat nervously. "It means serving the crown faithfully, Your Majesty, paying our tributes, following your laws, defending your realm when called upon." "A textbook answer," the king replied, beginning to walk slowly through the crowd. Villagers pressed back to give him room, but his attention seemed focused on their faces rather than their deference. "But I find that true loyalty is best measured not in times of peace, but in moments of testing." He paused near the center of the square, close to the ancient stone pillar that marked Greyhill's founding. "I've heard interesting reports about this village. Stories of resilience during the harsh winter, of neighbors helping neighbors, of a healer who works without payment to ease suffering." His gaze swept the crowd. "Such actions speak to character, the foundation upon which true loyalty is built." Anwyn felt a flutter of surprise. How could the king know about her work? She had never spoken of it beyond the village, and certainly no one here would have thought to mention such a trivial matter to royal messengers. As if sensing her thoughts, Rorik's steel-gray eyes found hers across the square. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, their gazes locked. She saw intelligence there, and something else, a weariness that suggested the weight of his crown was heavier than most could imagine. But she did not look away, would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her cower like the others did. It was then that her father chose to make his presence known. Gareth stumbled forward from where he'd been standing near the tavern, his gait unsteady from the morning's drinking. Several villagers tried to catch his arm, to pull him back, but he shrugged them off with the stubborn determination of a man too drunk to recognize danger. "Your Majesty," he called out, his words slurring slightly. "Mighty King, I have something to offer you that the others haven't considered." Elder Anwyn's face went pale. "Gareth, please, return to your place." No, Gareth continued, waving dismissively. "I've got tribute, too. Something special for our glorious king." He reached back and grabbed Anwyn's arm, pulling her forward before she could react. The movement was so sudden, so unexpected, that she stumbled slightly before catching her balance. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as her father's intentions became clear. "Take my fat daughter," Gareth announced with a cruel laugh, shoving Anwyn toward the king. "If you've got a taste for charity, she's all yours. 28 years old and never been kissed hell. Never even been looked at by a decent man. But she can cook and clean, and she knows her herbs." The silence that followed was deafening. Anwyn felt the heat of 100 stares, heard the barely suppressed snickers of some villagers, saw the mixture of pity and embarrassment on others' faces. This was her worst nightmare made manifest, her deepest shame, displayed before the most powerful man in the kingdom, like goods at market. But something inside her refused to break. Instead of crying, instead of begging, instead of running away, as every instinct screamed at her to do, Anwyn straightened her spine and lifted her chin. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. If this was to be her moment of ultimate humiliation, she would face it with whatever dignity she could muster. King Rorik stepped closer, close enough that she could see the battle scars that marked his hands and forearms. His expression was unreadable as he studied her face, and she found herself holding her breath. This was the moment he would reject her, would turn away in disgust as everyone expected. Instead, he spoke in a voice that carried clearly across the silent square. "She has more courage than any man here." The words hit the crowd like a thunderclap. Gasps and murmurs erupted from every direction as the king continued, his gaze never leaving Anwyn's face. "Your daughter stands before her sovereign without fear or false flattery. She does not grovel or weep or beg for mercy she does not need. And you," his attention shifted to Gareth with the cold intensity of winter wind, "you offer as trash what any wise man would recognize as treasure." Gareth's face had gone from flushed red to ashen white. The crowd pressed closer, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. "I take only what is rare," Rorik declared, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Your daughter will come to court, not as property, but as healer to the royal household. She will hold a position of honor and respect, serving the crown with the skills that you, in your blindness, have failed to value." The square erupted in shocked whispers and exclamations. Anwyn felt the world tilt beneath her feet. This couldn't be happening. Kings didn't rescue village healers. They didn't see value where others saw only burden. "Your Majesty," she found, her voice at last, amazed at how steady it sounded. "I am honored by your offer, but I must ask why." Rorik's expression softened almost imperceptibly, because true worth is often hidden from those who lack the wisdom to recognize it. "And because my kingdom has need of healers who serve from compassion rather than coin." He turned to address the crowd once more. "Let this be a lesson to all who would follow me. Judge not by appearance, but by character. Value not what glitters, but what endures. And remember that the crown protects all who serve with genuine heart, even when their own families fail to do so." The rebuke to Gareth was clear, and the blacksmith visibly shrank under the weight of royal displeasure. But for Anwyn, the world had suddenly expanded beyond the narrow borders of Greyhill's prejudices. She was being offered a chance at a life. She had never dared to dream a life where her skills would be valued, where her worth would be measured by her actions rather than her appearance. "We leave within the hour," the king announced. "Gather what you need, but travel light. Your old life ends today." As the crowd slowly dispersed and the villagers struggled to process what they had witnessed, Anwyn stood in the square that had been the site of so much quiet suffering over the years. The ancient stone pillar seemed different now, not a monument to unchanging tradition, but a marker of the moment when everything changed. Her father approached hesitantly, the alcohol having fled his system in the face of royal disapproval. "Anwyn, you said what you truly think of me," she replied quietly, not unkindly, but without warmth. "Perhaps that's the most honest we've been with each other in years." She turned and walked toward their cottage to gather her few possessions. leaving Gareth standing alone in the square, where his words had set in motion forces far beyond his comprehension. Behind her, she could hear the king's men preparing for departure, and ahead lay a future that remained unwritten. For the first time in her adult life, Anwyn allowed herself to hope that the cottage felt smaller than ever as Anwyn moved through it, one final time, gathering the few possessions that held meaning for her. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the overwhelming reality that her entire world was about to change in ways she could barely comprehend. She folded her mother's woolen cloak carefully, the fabric soft from years of wear, but still strong. Elena had woven it herself during the long winter before Anwyn's birth, working by candlelight to create something that would last. The deep brown wool had faded to a warm russet, and the edges showed signs of careful mending, but it remained the most precious thing Anwyn owned. Wrapped within its folds were her mother's silver thimble, a small carved wooden comb, and the leather-bound journal where Elena had recorded her healing knowledge. Her healing satchel came next, the worn leather shaped by countless journeys through Greyhill streets. She checked each carefully wrapped bundle of herbs, chamomile, willow bark, feverfew, elderflower, and dozens of others. Some she had gathered herself from the meadows beyond the village. Others had been traded from traveling merchants who recognized her knowledge. Master Aldrich had insisted she take his collection of rare seeds, pressing them into her hands with tears in his ancient eyes. "You'll find better soil for these at court than in this rocky ground," he had whispered. "Make something beautiful grow, child." The sound of horses outside reminded her that time was precious. She took one last look around the small room that had been her sanctuary, the narrow bed where she had dreamed impossible dreams, the small table where she had studied her mother's notes by candlelight, the window that looked out over the garden where she had learned to recognize healing plants. By touch and smell, her father sat hunched at the kitchen table, staring into an empty tankard. The sight of him, suddenly aged, suddenly small, stirred unexpected compassion in her heart. Whatever his failings, he was still her father, and this parting might well be forever. "I've left instructions for Willem's care with Master Aldrich," she said quietly. "The fever has broken, but he'll need strengthening tonics for another week. And Mrs. Marta will need help with the birthing when her time comes. She carries the baby too high." Gareth looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "You speak as if you're not coming back." "I don't know if I am," Anwyn replied honestly. "This isn't a visit to the next village, Father. I'm going to serve at the royal court. Everything is different now." He was quiet for a long moment, then reached across the table to where she stood. His calloused hand covered hers briefly. "Your mother would be proud," he said roughly. "She always said you were meant for more than this place could offer." The unexpected kindness in his voice nearly broke her composure, but the sound of approaching footsteps cut the moment short. Captain Marcus, the king's lieutenant, appeared in the doorway, a lean, weathered man whose courteous manner couldn't entirely disguise his impatience. "My lady," he said with more respect than anyone in Greyhill had ever shown her, "His Majesty requests your presence. We're ready to depart." Anwyn shouldered her pack and followed the captain outside, where the king's retinue waited in formation. 20 mounted warriors sat their horses with professional ease, their armor and weapons speaking of countless battles survived. Pack animals carried supplies in the village's tribute, while a pair of spare horses stood ready for additional riders. King Rorik sat his destrier near the square center, his presence still commanding, despite the mundane nature of departure preparations. When he saw her approach, he dismounted and gestured toward a smaller Mari with intelligent eyes and a gentle demeanor. "This is Moonwhisper," he said, offering the reins. "She's steady and well-trained, but spirited enough to keep you alert." "Can you ride?" "Yes, Your Majesty," Anwyn replied, accepting the reins with hands that had steadied considerably. "My mother taught me when I was young, though I haven't had much practice lately." "You'll have plenty of opportunity to improve your skills," Rorik said, with what might have been the hint of a smile. The journey to court takes 4 days, and we'll be covering ground quickly. As Anwyn settled into the saddle, she became aware of the curious stares from the king's men. Some watched with obvious skepticism. What use could a village healer be at court? Others showed polite interest, perhaps wondering what their sovereign had seen in her that they had missed. But none displayed the open mockery she had grown accustomed to in Greyhill, and that small mercy felt like a gift. The column formed up with practiced efficiency. King Rorik took his position at the head, flanked by his personal guard, while Anwyn found herself riding alongside Captain Marcus in the center of the formation. The protection was both obvious and comforting. Whatever dangers lay ahead, she would not face them alone. As they rode through Greyhill's gates for the last time, Anwyn looked back to see villagers lining the streets. Some watched with curiosity, others with envy, and a few with something that might have been respect. Master Aldrich raised his hand in farewell, and she returned the gesture, knowing that a chapter of her life was closing forever. The road beyond Greyhill was better maintained than she had expected, wide enough for the column to ride 2 abreast and paved with stones that showed evidence of regular repair. This was one of the king's highways, built to allow rapid movement of troops and supplies throughout the realm. The investment in infrastructure spoke to a ruler who understood that power required more than just military might. "Tell me, Captain," Marcus said as they settled into the steady rhythm of travel, "what healing knowledge do you possess? His Majesty doesn't make decisions lightly, especially regarding matters of court personnel." The question was fair, and Anwyn sensed genuine interest rather than challenge in his tone. "I learned from my mother, who learned from her mother before her. Herbal remedies, treatment of common ailments, assistance with childbirth, care of wounds and infections. I've been serving as Greyhill's healer for several years now, though without formal recognition." "And you've had success with these treatments?" "Yes," she replied with quiet confidence. "I've lost patients, of course. Sometimes the sickness is too strong, or help comes too late. But I've also saved lives that others had given up for lost. My mother taught me that the body wants to heal itself. Our job is simply to give it the best chance to do so." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. The court physicians are learned men, trained in the great schools of the South. They may not immediately appreciate traditional methods. Then perhaps they'll learn something new, Anwyn said with more boldness than she felt. "And perhaps I'll learn from them as well. Knowledge grows when it's shared, not hoarded." The captain's weathered face cracked into the first genuine smile she had seen from any of the king's men. "I think you may surprise them, my lady. And if I may say so, His Majesty has excellent judgment when it comes to recognizing hidden potential." As the day wore on and the miles passed beneath their horses' hooves, Anwyn began to understand that this journey represented more than just physical travel. Each step took her further from the life she had known and closer to possibilities she was only beginning to imagine. The king rode ahead with the easy authority of a man who had never doubted his right to command. But occasionally, she caught him glancing back, his steel-gray eyes thoughtful. What had he seen in that village square that others had missed? What had convinced him that a woman dismissed by her own people was worth bringing to his court? The questions circled in her mind like leaves in autumn wind, but no answers came. She would have to trust in his judgment and her own ability to prove herself worthy of the chance he had given her. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western hills when they made camp for the night. The king's men worked with the efficiency of long practice, establishing a secure perimeter, tending to the horses, and preparing a simple but substantial meal. Anwyn helped where she could, her healing knowledge proving useful when one of the younger soldiers complained of saddle sores. As she treated the man's minor ailment with a salve made from comfrey and calendula, she became aware of King Rorik watching from across the camp. His expression was unreadable, but she sensed approval in his gaze. When their eyes met, he nodded once, a small gesture that somehow carried the weight of validation she had never received from her own father. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and the next step on a journey that had no certain destination. But tonight, for the first time in years, Anwyn fell asleep without the weight of disappointment and dismissal pressing down upon her. Instead, she dreamed of possibilities as vast as the star-filled sky above their camp. The royal seat of Ironhold rose from the northern plains like something from a dream, its massive walls of dark stone stretching toward the sky with an elegance that spoke of both beauty and impregnability. As their column crested the final hill, Anwyn gasped at her first sight of the capital, a city that sprawled across 3 hills, connected by graceful bridges and dominated by the towering spires of the royal castle. "Impressive, isn't it, Captain?" Marcus observed, noting her expression. King Rorik's grandfather began the reconstruction, but it was our current sovereign who completed the vision. Every stone was placed with purpose, defense, beauty, and the projection of power working in harmony. The city gates stood open in welcome, flanked by guards whose armor gleamed like mirrors in the afternoon sun. Citizens lined the streets as the royal column passed, their faces showing the genuine respect and affection of people who trusted their king's judgment. Children waved enthusiastically while merchants and craftspeople paused in their work to bow as Rorik rode by. Anwyn found herself studying the faces around her, noting the well-fed appearance of even the common folk, the quality of their clothing, the absence of the desperate hunger she had seen in some villages during harsh winters. This was a kingdom that prospered under its ruler's guidance, and the evidence was visible everywhere she looked. The castle itself was even more magnificent up close. The main keep soared 8 stories into the sky, its walls adorned with carved reliefs that told the story of the realm's founding. Towers at each corner provided defensive positions while also serving as artistic statements, their peaks crowned with banners that snapped proudly in the mountain breeze. Gardens visible through ornate gates promised beauty within the fortress walls, suggesting a ruler who valued more than mere military might. As they passed through the main gates, Anwyn caught sight of the royal seal carved into the keystone, the same wolf's head she had seen on the battle banners, but rendered here with intricate detail that transformed it from a symbol of war into one of noble purpose. The wolf's eyes seemed to follow her as they entered the courtyard, and she wondered if that effect was intentional. Grooms appeared as if by magic to take charge of the horses, their movements efficient and respectful. Anwyn dismounted from Moonwhisper with gratitude. 4 days in the saddle had tested muscles she had forgotten she possessed. The Marin nuzzled her shoulder gently, and she stroked the soft nose with genuine affection. "She likes you, King Rorik," observed, appearing at her side with the quiet grace that seemed characteristic of him. Moonwhisper is particular about her riders. "I think you'll find her available whenever you need to ride out from the castle." The casual offer of continued access to such a fine horse was another small kindness that Anwyn added to the growing list of reasons to trust this unexpected patron. "Thank you, Your Majesty. She's a wonderful companion." "Come," he said, gesturing toward the castle's main entrance. "Let me introduce you to your new life." The great hall took Anwyn's breath away. Completely. Vaulted ceilings soared overhead, supported by columns carved to resemble ancient trees whose branches formed intricate patterns in the stone. Banners from across the realm hung between the columns, creating a tapestry of colors and symbols that spoke to the unity Rorik had forged from previously fractured territories. At the far end, the throne carved from a single massive block of black marble sat empty but magnificent, a symbol of power held in trust rather than grasped in greed. "Master Alwyn," the king called to an elderly man who approached with measured steps. This Alwyn was clearly different from Greyhill's village elder, taller, more refined, with the bearing of a man accustomed to the highest levels of authority. His robes were rich but not ostentatious, marked with the subtle embroidery that indicated his position as the castle's chief steward. "Your Majesty," the steward replied with a bow that managed to convey respect without subservience. "Welcome home. I trust your journey was successful?" "Indeed it was. Master Alwyn, I present Anwyn of Greyhill, who will be joining us as a healer. Please see that she's given appropriate quarters in the medical wing and arrange for her to meet with Master Brennan at his earliest convenience." Anwyn felt a flutter of nervousness at the mention of Master Brennan. If he was the chief physician, her acceptance at court would largely depend on his approval. Traditional healers and formally trained physicians didn't always see eye to eye, and she had no illusions about the challenge that lay ahead. "Of course, Your Majesty," Master Alwyn replied, his sharp eyes stunning Anwyn with professional assessment. "Will she be requiring ladies' maids, tutoring in court protocol, or other services appropriate to her new station?" The question highlighted something Anwyn hadn't fully considered. Her transformation from village healer to court physician represented a massive leap in social status. She would need to learn new ways of speaking, moving, and conducting herself in an environment where mistakes could have serious consequences. "See to whatever she needs," King Rorik said simply. "In Alwyn, she's to be treated with the respect due to any member of the medical staff. Her knowledge may be different from what we're accustomed to, but it's no less valuable." The pointed instruction carried the weight of royal command, and Anwyn saw the steward's expression shift to one of greater attention. Whatever doubts he might have harbored about her qualifications, he would keep them to himself. "Follow me, if you please," Master Alwyn said, his tone warming considerably. "I'll show you to your quarters, and then we can discuss your needs." As they climbed a spiral staircase that wound through the castle's interior, Anwyn marveled at the attention to detail visible everywhere. Tapestries depicted scenes of healing and learning, while carved wooden panels showed herbs and healing plants rendered with botanical accuracy. This was clearly a place where knowledge was valued and preserved. "Your quarters are in the Eastern Tower," Master Alwyn explained as they walked. "The medical wing occupies 3 floors, Master Brennan's study and consultation rooms on the ground level, the healing chambers and pharmacy on the 2nd floor, and living quarters for medical staff on the 3rd. You'll have privacy but also easy access to your work." The room he showed her was simple but comfortable, with a good-sized bed, a writing desk positioned near the window for optimal light, and built-in shelves that would be perfect for herbs and equipment. The window looked out over the castle's herb gardens, where she could see neat rows of medicinal plants growing in carefully tended plots. "This is more than adequate," Anwyn said, setting down her pack and looking around with genuine appreciation. "In fact, it's far better than anything I expected." "King Rorik believes that comfortable living conditions contribute to effective work," the steward replied. "Now, if you're ready, I'll take you to meet Master Brennan. He's been informed of your arrival and is quite curious to assess your capabilities." The meeting with the chief physician proved to be both challenging and encouraging. Master Brennan was a man in his 50s, with the pale complexion of someone who spent most of his time indoors and the careful hands of a surgeon. His study was filled with books, anatomical drawings, and gleaming medical instruments that spoke to the formal education he had received. "So," he said after the introductions were complete, "you're the healer His Majesty discovered in Greyhill. Was it? Tell me about your training." Anwyn chose her words carefully, describing her mother's teachings and her years of practical experience, while acknowledging the differences between her background and formal medical education. Master Brennan listened with the focused attention of a man evaluating a potential colleague, asking pointed questions about specific treatments and their outcomes. "Interesting," he mused when she finished describing her treatment of a difficult Case of blood poisoning using a combination of golden seal and honey. We've had mixed results with similar infections using mercury treatments. Your approach is unconventional, but the outcomes you describe are impressive. I'd be happy to demonstrate any of my methods, Anwyn offered. And I'm eager to learn from your experience as well. I'm sure there's much I could gain from formal medical training. Master Brennan's expression softened slightly. A wise attitude. Pride has no place in healing, only results matter. I think we can work together effectively, provided you're willing to prove your methods rather than simply asserting their value. I would expect nothing less, Anwyn replied. As the days passed, Anwyn began to settle into the rhythm of court life. Her mornings were spent in the medical wing, where Master Brennan introduced her to the formal practices of court medicine. She learned about anatomical studies that revealed the body's structure in ways her traditional training had never explored, and she gained access to rare medicines imported from distant lands. In return, she shared knowledge that proved surprisingly valuable. Her understanding of local plants and their properties filled gaps in the court's medical arsenal, particularly for treating common ailments that didn't require expensive imported remedies. When a kitchen maid developed a persistent cough that resisted traditional treatments, Anwyn's tea made from wild cherry bark and coltsfoot provided relief within days. But it was her first encounter with King Rorik as a patient that truly established her value at court. She was organizing her herb collection in the pharmacy when Master Brennan appeared with unusual urgency in his manner. His Majesty requires medical attention, he said without preamble. An old war wound has become inflamed, and he's requested that you assist in the treatment. Anwyn followed the chief physician to the royal chambers, her heart beating faster with nervous anticipation. She had seen the king daily since her arrival, but always in formal settings where their interactions were limited to courteous greetings. The idea of treating him as a patient felt both daunting and strangely intimate. The king's private study was smaller than she had expected, furnished with comfortable chairs and lined with books that suggested a ruler who valued learning as much as warfare. Rorik sat in a chair near the fireplace, his shirt removed to reveal the source of his discomfort, a long scar across his ribs that showed signs of recent inflammation. Master Brennan has been treating this with poultices and imported salves, he said without embarrassment at his state of undress. But the infection keeps returning. He suggested that your knowledge of local remedies might provide a different approach. Anwyn approached professionally, her healer's instincts overriding any personal awkwardness. The scar was old but impressive, clearly the result of a sword thrust that had come dangerously close to being fatal. The current inflammation showed the characteristic signs of a low-grade infection that had become chronic. "May I examine the wound?" she asked, and at his nod, she gently probed the area with clean hands. The skin was hot to the touch and slightly swollen, with small areas that suggested foreign matter might still be trapped beneath the surface. "This happened some time ago," she observed. 3 years, Rorik confirmed. A rebel lord who thought treachery was preferable to honest defeat. His blade was dirty. The infection nearly killed me, even after we won the battle. "And you've had recurring problems since then?" "Whenever I'm under particular stress or haven't been sleeping well. Master Brennan keeps it controlled, but it never truly heals." Anwyn nodded thoughtfully. "I think I can help. There's a treatment my mother used for stubborn infections. It requires patience, but it addresses the root cause rather than just the symptoms." Over the following days, she applied her treatment, a combination of drawing salves to remove any remaining contamination, followed by healing preparations made from plantain, comfrey, and calendula. But more importantly, she recognized that the king's lifestyle, constant stress, irregular sleep, and the physical demands of leadership was preventing proper healing. "You need rest," she told him bluntly during one of their sessions. "Real rest, not just collapsing exhausted at the end of 16-hour days. Your body is trying to heal, but you're not giving it the chance. King Rorik looked at her with surprise, and something that might have been amusement. You realize you're giving orders to your sovereign? I'm giving medical advice to my patient, Anwyn replied with quiet firmness. If you were a farmer or a merchant, I'd tell you the same thing. Healing doesn't recognize rank. The frank exchange marked a turning point in their relationship. As her treatment proved effective and the chronic inflammation finally began to subside, their conversations during medical sessions grew longer and more personal. She learned about the burdens of leadership, the loneliness of making decisions that affected thousands of lives, and the constant vigilance required to maintain peace in a realm surrounded by potential enemies. In return, she shared stories of village life, of the satisfaction that came from helping others heal, and of the quiet wisdom she had gained from her mother's teachings. Rorik proved to be an attentive listener, asking thoughtful questions and showing genuine interest in her experiences. But not everyone at court was pleased with her growing influence. Some of the nobles whispered about the fat village girl, who had somehow gained the king's ear, questioning what services she might be providing beyond medical treatment. The court ladies were particularly cool in their reception, making it clear that they considered her beneath their notice. Pay them? No mind, Master Brennan advised when she mentioned the gossip. Court politics are as complex as any disease, and twice as dangerous. Focus on your work, prove your worth through results, and let the king deal with any who would undermine you. His advice proved sound, but Anwyn couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking a tightrope with consequences she didn't fully understand. Her position at court was secure as long as she remained useful to the king, but court favor could be as changeable as the weather. She would need to be very careful about how she navigated the complex social currents that surrounded royal power. As her first month at court drew to a close, Anwyn reflected on how much her life had changed. She had gone from being dismissed and overlooked to holding a position of genuine responsibility and respect. Her healing skills were valued, her opinions were sought, and for the first time in her adult life, she felt truly useful. But beneath the satisfaction lay a growing awareness that her relationship with King Rorik was becoming something more complex than the simple patron-healer dynamic it had begun as. The man she was coming to know through their private sessions was very different from the distant sovereign she had first met in Greyhill Square. He was thoughtful, lonely, burdened by responsibilities that would crush a lesser person, and unexpectedly kind. The realization that she was developing feelings for her royal patient was both thrilling and terrifying. Such emotions were dangerous. At court, where personal relationships could have political implications far beyond anything she had ever imagined. But as she settled into sleep in her comfortable chamber, looking out over the herb gardens where moonlight painted the medicinal plants in silver, she couldn't deny the truth her heart was whispering. Her life at court was just beginning, and already it was becoming more complicated than she had ever dreamed possible. Winter settled over Ironhold like a familiar cloak, bringing with it the kind of bitter cold that tested both body and spirit. But within the castle walls, Anwyn had found her rhythm, and her reputation as a healer continued to grow with each successful treatment. The ancient healing tome that Master Brennan had entrusted to her care lay open on her desk, its pages filled with centuries of accumulated medical wisdom that she was slowly absorbing and integrating with her own traditional knowledge. The leather-bound volume was a treasure, beyond price, hand-copied by generations of court physicians, illustrated with detailed drawings of herbs and anatomical studies, and annotated with personal observations from healers who had served the crown for over 200 years. Master Brennan had presented it to her after she successfully treated Lord Marshal Garrett's recurring fever, a condition that had baffled the court physicians for months. "You've earned the right to add your own knowledge to these pages," he had said, watching as she reverently traced the illuminated letters on the title page. Your mother's wisdom deserves to be preserved alongside the formal learning recorded here. Now, as snow swirled past her window, Anwyn carefully transcribed her treatment notes into the tome's margins, adding her voice to the chorus of healers who had come before her. The work was painstaking, but deeply satisfying. Each entry represented not just medical knowledge, but a bridge between the traditional healing arts and formal medicine. A soft knock at her door interrupted her concentration. "Enter," she called, setting down her quill and turning to find Sir Edmund Blackwood standing in her doorway. The tall, fair-haired knight had become a regular presence in her life over the past months, seeking her company with increasing frequency. An obvious intent. "Good evening, Anwyn," he said with the warm smile that had charmed half the ladies at court. "I hope I'm not disturbing your work." "Not at all," she replied, though that wasn't entirely true. Sir Edmund was kind, intelligent, and genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions, qualities that had been rare in her experience with men. His attention was flattering, and his courtship respectful, but something held her back from encouraging his advances too enthusiastically. "I wanted to invite you to join me for the evening meal," he continued, stepping into the room and glancing at the ancient tome with obvious respect. "And perhaps afterward, if the weather permits, we could walk in the covered gardens. I know you enjoy seeing how the winter plants are faring." The invitation was tempting. Sir Edmund's company was always pleasant, and the covered gardens were indeed beautiful even in winter, their glass walls protecting delicate plants while allowing views of the snow-covered landscape beyond. But tonight she had planned to review the king's medical notes. His old wound had been troubling him again, and she wanted to adjust his treatment regimen. "That sounds lovely," she said, then hesitated. "But I should check on His Majesty's condition first. He mentioned some discomfort during our session this morning." Sir Edmund's expression flickered with something that might have been disappointment or irritation, quickly masked by understanding. "Of course. Your dedication to your patients is one of the things I admire most about you. Perhaps tomorrow evening instead." "Yes," Anwyn agreed, feeling oddly guilty for the relief she felt at the postponement. Tomorrow would be perfect. After Sir Edmund departed, Anwyn gathered her medical supplies and made her way through the castle's corridors toward the royal quarters. The evening was still early enough that she might catch the king before he retired, and his health was genuinely concerning her. The chronic infection that had plagued him for years was largely healed, but stress and poor sleep continued to take their toll on his overall condition. She found him in his private study, seated at his desk with documents scattered before him, and the firelight casting long shadows across his weathered features. He looked up when she entered, and she was struck once again by the weariness in his steel-gray eyes. "Anwyn," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that it lacked in formal court settings, "I wasn't expecting you this evening." "You mentioned that the scar was troubling you again," she replied, setting her supplies on the table near his chair. "I wanted to check the healing and perhaps adjust your treatment." He nodded and began unlacing his shirt without the self-consciousness that had marked their early sessions. Over the months, their doctor-patient relationship had developed into something comfortable and professional, though Anwyn was increasingly aware of the undercurrents that ran beneath their formal interactions. The scar had indeed become inflamed. Again, though not severely. As she gently examined the area, applying a cooling salve infused with willow bark and calendula, she found herself studying his face in the firelight. The strong jaw, the network of fine lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into sun and wind, the silver threading through his dark hair, all combined to create a portrait of a man who had carried heavy burdens with grace. "You're not sleeping again," she observed, noting the shadows beneath his eyes. "Political tensions with the eastern kingdoms," he admitted. "King Aldrich is massing troops near our border, ostensibly for training exercises. but my scouts report fortifications being built in positions that would support an invasion rather than defensive maneuvers. Anwyn's hand stilled on his skin. War? Possibly. Aldrich has been testing our resolve for months, and I suspect he believes our recent prosperity has made us soft. He's mistaken, but correcting that error may require showing him the strength behind our peace. The revelation explained his recent tension and the increased activity she had noticed around the castle. More messengers coming and going, longer strategy sessions with his war council, and the kind of controlled urgency that preceded major military action. Is there anything I can do to help? She asked, then immediately felt foolish. What could a village healer offer a king preparing for war? But Rorik's expression softened with what looked like genuine gratitude. You're already helping more than, having someone I can speak freely with, someone who isn't trying to advance their own agenda or position, is more valuable than you might imagine. The words sent a warm flutter through her chest, followed immediately by a stab of guilt. Sir Edmund's face flashed through her mind, along with the uncomfortable realization that her feelings for the king were definitely not as simple as those of a healer for her patient. Your Majesty, she began carefully, there's something I should perhaps mention. Sir Edmund has been, he's shown interest in courting you, Rorik finished, his voice carefully neutral. Yes, I've noticed. He's a good man, well regarded at court, and he clearly values your intelligence as well as your other qualities. There was something in his tone that made her look up sharply, but his expression remained unreadable. He is a good man, she agreed slowly. Kind, respectful, interested in my work, but? The single word hung between them, weighted with implications neither of them seemed willing to address directly. But I'm not certain my feelings match his level of interest, she admitted quietly. I've never been courted before, not seriously. I'm not sure I know how to navigate such relationships. Follow your heart, Rorik said simply, but be careful with his. Sir Edmund is more invested in this courtship than his casual manner might suggest. If you don't intend to accept his eventual proposal, it would be kindness to make that clear before his feelings deepen further. The practical advice made sense, but it also raised questions she wasn't ready to confront. Why was she reluctant to encourage Sir Edmund's interest? He was everything she should want in a potential husband, kind, stable, accepting of her unusual profession, and genuinely fond of her company. But when she imagined a future with him, something felt incomplete, as if she would be settling for safety rather than reaching for happiness. Thank you for the counsel, she said, beginning to pack her supplies. And please, try to get some rest tonight. I know the political situation is urgent, but you won't make good decisions if exhaustion clouds your judgment. Yes, healer, he replied with the hint of a smile. I'll try to follow your orders. As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her at the door. Anwyn, whatever you decide about Sir Edmund, or any other aspect of your life, here know that your position at court isn't dependent on anyone's approval, but mine. You've earned your place through skill and dedication, not through political alliances or social connections. The reassurance was exactly what she needed to hear, though it also highlighted the growing complexity of her situation. Her professional security was tied to the king's favor, but her personal feelings were becoming entangled with that same relationship in ways that could prove dangerous for everyone involved. Walking back through the castle corridors, Anwyn reflected on how much her life had changed since that humiliating day in Greyhill Square. She had gone from being dismissed as worthless to holding a position of genuine importance, from isolation to being courted by a nobleman, from despair to hope. But with those gains had come new challenges and responsibilities that her village life had never prepared her for. The ancient healing tome waited on her desk, its pages full of wisdom accumulated over centuries. Perhaps somewhere in its carefully preserved knowledge lay guidance for the personal dilemmas that formal medical training could never address. But as she settled down to continue her transcription work, she suspected that some questions could only be answered by the heart. Regardless of how much wisdom the mind might accumulate, spring arrived with unusual suddenness, melting the winter. Snows in rushing torrents that filled the mountain streams and brought the first green shoots pushing through the dark earth of the castle gardens. With the changing season came news that would reshape everything. King Aldric had indeed declared war, his armies crossing the eastern border under cover of the spring floods, believing that Ironhold's forces would be slow to respond across the muddy roads. Anwyn watched from her window as the castle transformed from a seat of peaceful governance into a military stronghold. Soldiers drilled in the courtyards, weapons were sharpened and distributed, and the great war banners that had hung decoratively in the halls were taken down to be carried into battle. The royal medical texts that had become her constant companions now shared her attention with preparations for treating wounded warriors. "We'll need supplies for field medicine," Master Brennan explained as they worked together to organize medical kits for the army's physicians. Infections from dirty weapons, arrow wounds, sword cuts, broken bones from cavalry charges, battlefield injuries are different from the ailments we typically treat here at court. Anwyn nodded, packing clean bandages and her most effective healing salves. "My mother told me stories from the border conflicts of her youth. She said the hardest part wasn't treating the wounds themselves, but doing so with limited supplies and under terrible conditions. Your mother was wise. We'll do what we can to prepare the field medics, but much will depend on their ability to adapt our methods to chaotic circumstances." As they worked, Anwyn became aware of a presence in the doorway. King Rorik stood watching them, his expression thoughtful. Gone were the comfortable clothes he wore for their private medical sessions, replaced by the practical armor and military bearing of a warrior king preparing for battle. "Master Brennan, Anwyn," he said, stepping into the room. "How are our medical preparations progressing?" "Well, Your Majesty," Master Brennan replied. "We've prepared field kits for the advance units and organized supplies for the main medical corps. And Wynn has contributed several effective treatments that should prove valuable in battlefield conditions." Rorik's gaze met hers briefly, and she saw something there that made her chest tighten with unexpected emotion. "I have a request to make of you both. I want Anwyn to accompany the army as my personal physician." The words hit her like a physical blow. Master Brennan's face paled with obvious concern. "Your Majesty," the chief physician began carefully, "while Anwyn's skills are excellent, battlefield medicine requires—" "I'm not asking her to work in the field surgical tents," Rorik interrupted gently. "But my old wound always troubles me during campaigns, and I've learned to trust her judgment about my overall health. More importantly, I may need someone whose loyalty is absolute and whose discretion is beyond question." The implication behind his words was clear. He expected treachery from some quarter and wanted someone near him whose motives he didn't need to question. Anwyn felt a flutter of fear at the thought of war, but also a surge of determination. If he needed her, she would not fail him. "I'll come," she said simply. "When do we leave?" 3 days, Rorik replied. "Backlight, but bring everything you need for extended treatment of my condition. This may be a longer campaign than anyone hopes." After he left, Master Brennan turned to her with a mixture of admiration and worry. "Are you certain about this decision? War is uglier than anything you've experienced, and the dangers go far beyond medical challenges." "I'm certain," Anwyn replied, though her voice carried more confidence than she felt. "He needs me, and I won't abandon him to preserve my own safety." The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Sir Edmund sought her out repeatedly, his usual calm demeanor cracked by obvious distress at her decision to accompany the army. "This is madness," he said during their final conversation, his hands gripping her shoulders with uncharacteristic intensity. "You're a healer, not a soldier. Your place is here, safe within the castle walls. My place is where my skills are needed most, Anwyn replied gently. The king requires medical attention that only I can provide. How can I refuse when the realm's stability may depend on his health? There are other physicians who could— No, she interrupted firmly. There aren't. Not for this particular condition, and not with the complete trust he needs in someone so close to him during wartime. Sir Edmund's face fell with the realization that her decision was final. When you return, he said quietly, we need to have a serious conversation about our future. I can't continue this courtship if you're going to place yourself in mortal danger every time duty calls. The ultimatum stung, but it also clarified something that had been troubling her for months. A man who truly understood her would never ask her to choose between her calling and his comfort. The realization was both liberating and painful. Sir Edmund was a good man, but he wasn't the right man for her. The morning of departure arrived gray and cold, with low clouds promising rain before the day ended. Anwyn stood in the courtyard, with her traveling pack and medical supplies, watching as the king's personal guard prepared for the march. These were the elite warriors who had never known defeat, men whose loyalty to their sovereign was absolute and whose skill in battle was legendary throughout the realm. King Rorik approached, leading his destrier and looking every inch the warrior king that songs were written about. His armor was practical rather than ornate, designed for protection and mobility rather than display. But there was something in his bearing that spoke to the weight of command and the burden of leading men into battle. Ready? He asked, and she nodded, accepting his help to mount Moonwhisper. The Mara seemed to sense the seriousness of the occasion, standing steady and alert as the column formed up around them as they rode through the castle gates and into the countryside beyond. Anwyn looked back once at the towers and walls that had become her home. Master Bren stood on the walls watching their departure, and she caught sight of Sir Edmund at one of the upper windows, his face a mask of controlled emotion. The army was impressive, thousands of disciplined soldiers moving with the coordinated precision that spoke to intensive training and excellent leadership. Supply wagons, cavalry units, archers, and infantry all had their places in the grand procession, while scouts ranged ahead and behind to ensure they wouldn't be caught by surprise. Nervous? Rorik asked, riding alongside her as they settled into the rhythm of the march. Yes, Anwyn admitted honestly. I've never been in a war before. I'm not entirely sure what to expect. Good, he replied, surprising her. Overconfidence kills more soldiers than enemy weapons. Stay alert, stay close to my guard, and remember that your primary duty is to keep me healthy enough to lead effectively. As the day wore on and the miles passed beneath their horses' hooves, Anwyn began to understand something about Rorik that their comfortable medical sessions had only hinted at. This was a man transformed by the responsibility of command. Every decision he made could mean life or death for thousands of people. Every tactical choice could determine the fate of the realm. The weight of that burden was visible in the set of his shoulders and the constant alertness in his eyes. But there was something else, something that became clear as she watched him interact with his officers and men. They didn't just obey him out of duty or fear. They followed him out of genuine respect and affection. He knew many of them by name, asked after their families, and showed the kind of personal concern that bound armies together with loyalty. Stronger than steel dot when they made camp that first night, Anwyn was struck by how efficiently the army transformed from a marching column into a fortified position. Sentries were posted, defenses established, and cooking fires lit with the practiced ease of men who had done this countless times before. "Join me for the evening meal," Rorik requested, gesturing toward a pavilion that had been erected for his use. "I want to discuss what you might expect in the coming days." The meal was simple but substantial, the same food the common soldiers received, she noticed, rather than elaborate fare befitting a king. As they ate, Rorik explained the strategic situation with the clarity of someone who had studied warfare his entire life. Aldrich believes he's caught us unprepared, he said, spreading a map between them on the rough table. His forces are moving toward the river crossing at Milford, hoping to establish a foothold on our side of the border before we can respond in force. And are we unprepared? Anwyn asked. Rorik smiled grimly. Far from it. We've been watching his preparations for months. Our spies in his court have kept us informed of his plans, and we've been positioning forces to counter his every move. By the time he realizes his mistake, it will be too late. The confidence in his voice was reassuring, but Anwyn could see the tension in his posture. Leading an army was very different from the administrative duties of peacetime rule, and the favoredness stakes were higher than anything she had ever imagined. Your wound, she said quietly. How is it feeling under these conditions? Tight, he admitted, rubbing absently at the old scar beneath his armor. The stress and the long hours in the saddle aren't helping. I may need your attention more frequently than usual. Of course. And Your Majesty? I'm honored that you trust me enough to have me here. I won't let you down. His eyes met hers across the flickering candlelight, and for a moment the war, the army, and the weight of kingship seemed to fall away. What remained was simply a man and a woman who had found something rare and precious between them: understanding, respect, and feelings that neither dared acknowledge openly. I know you won't, he said quietly. Your loyalty means more to me than you might realize. As Anwyn settled into her bedroll that night, listening to the sounds of an army at rest around her, she realized that this campaign would test more than just military strategies and battlefield tactics. It would test the bonds of loyalty, the depths of courage, and the strength of feelings that had been growing in secret for months. Tomorrow would bring them closer to war, and with it, challenges that would either forge those bonds into something unbreakable or shatter them completely under the pressure of life and death decisions. But tonight she was exactly where she belonged, serving the man she had come to respect above all others, ready to face whatever trials lay ahead with the same quiet determination that had carried her from the shame of Greyhill Square to the honor of a king's trust. The battle at Milford had been swift and decisive, exactly as King Rorik had predicted. King Aldrich's forces, caught in the carefully prepared trap, had been routed with minimal losses to Einhold's army. But victory had come at an unexpected price. During the final charge, Rorik had taken an arrow to the shoulder, a wound that seemed minor at first, but had quickly become infected despite Anwyn's immediate treatment. Now, 3 days after their triumphant return to court, the king lay in his chambers burning with fever while Anwyn fought desperately to save his life. The infection had spread with alarming speed, and nothing in her considerable arsenal of remedies seemed capable of stopping its advance. What had begun as a simple battlefield wound had become a race against time that she was slowly losing. The fever's getting worse, Master Brennan observed grimly, checking the king's pulse with practiced fingers. Whatever infection has taken hold, it's unlike anything I've encountered before. Anwyn nodded, her face drawn with exhaustion and worry. She had barely left Rorik's side since they returned to the castle, trying every treatment she knew, and several she had improvised out of desperation. The shoulder wound itself was healing properly, but something else was consuming him from within, something that acted more like poison than ordinary infection. It doesn't make sense, she murmured, studying the symptoms that refused to follow any pattern she recognized. The wound was clean. I treated it immediately with proven remedies, and there's been no sign of corruption in the tissue. But his body is responding as if. She stopped mid-sentence, a terrible possibility forming in her mind. Moving to her supply cabinet, she retrieved a small silver chalice that had been brought to the king's chambers 3 days ago, the ornate goblet from which he had been drinking wine to celebrate their victory. Master Brennan, she said quietly. "I need you to examine this cup very carefully. Look for any residue, any staining, anything that might indicate it's been contaminated." The chief physician took the chalice with puzzled concern, holding it up to the light and studying its interior surface. After several minutes of careful examination, his face went pale. "There," he whispered, pointing to a barely visible discoloration along the rim. "It's so faint I nearly missed it, but there's definitely something here. A residue that shouldn't be present in a vessel used only for wine." Anwyn felt ice form in her stomach. What kind of residue? "I'm not certain, but if I had to guess," Master Bran paused, clearly reluctant to voice his suspicions. "It has the characteristics of moonbane extract, a rare poison derived from a flower that grows only in the far eastern kingdoms. It's colorless, nearly tasteless, and its effects can be delayed for hours or even days after ingestion." "Moonbane," Anwyn repeated, her mind racing through everything she knew about exotic poisons. Her mother had mentioned it once, describing it as a weapon of assassins because it mimicked the symptoms of infection or disease. "How do we treat it?" "That's the problem," Master Bran replied grimly. "There is no known antidote. The victims usually die within a week of ingestion, and their deaths appear to be from natural causes. It's the perfect tool for political assassination." The implications hit Anwyn like a physical blow. Someone had tried to murder the king, not during battle where such attempts might be expected, but here in his own castle, using the victory celebration as cover for treachery. And they had nearly succeeded. Who had access to that cup? She demanded, her healer's instincts overriding her shock. "Who brought it to his chambers?" "I don't know," Master Brennan admitted, "but we need to find out quickly. If there's a poisoner in the castle, they may try again when they realize this attempt has failed." "No," Anwyn said firmly, her mind already working on a plan. "They can't. No, we've discovered the poison. If they think their plan is succeeding, they'll remain confident and careless. That gives us time to identify them and find a way to save His Majesty." "But Anwyn, there is no antidote. Then we'll have to create one," she interrupted with fierce determination. "My mother's notes mention moonbane, and there might be traditional remedies that formal medicine hasn't explored. I need to search through every text, every journal, every scrap of healing knowledge we possess." As Master Brennan hurried away to secure the poisoned chalice and begin his own research, Anwyn turned back to the unconscious king. His face was flushed with fever, his breathing shallow and labored. She'd had perhaps 4 days before the poison's effects became irreversible. 4 days to accomplish what generations of physicians had thought impossible. But first, she needed to discover who had betrayed the man she had come to love. Moving through the castle with newfound purpose, Anwyn began her investigation carefully and quietly. She spoke with servants, guards, and nobles under the guise of gathering information about the king's condition. But her real goal was to determine who had been in the royal chambers during the victory celebration. The list was shorter than she had expected, but more disturbing than she had hoped. Only a select few had been invited to the private celebration in the king's quarters, his inner circle of advisors, his most trusted nobles, and the handful of people who had access to his personal chambers at any time, including Sir Edmund. The realization hit her like a blow to the stomach. Edmund had been present at the celebration, and raised his own cup in toasts to their victory, and had seemed genuinely pleased by their success. But he had also been visibly upset by her decision to accompany the army, had grown increasingly possessive in his courtship, and had made it clear that he expected her to choose between her duty and his desires. "No," she whispered to herself as she stood outside his chambers. "It can't be him. He's not capable of such betrayal." But even as she tried to deny the possibility, other details began falling into place with horrible clarity. Edmund's family had connections to the Eastern Kingdoms through his mother's lineage. He had access to exotic goods through his trading ventures, and he had been one of the few people who knew about her growing closeness to the king, a relationship that would end any hopes he might have harbored for their future together. With trembling hands, she knocked on his door, praying that her suspicions were wrong, while preparing herself for the worst. Edmund answered almost immediately, his face lighting up with what seemed like genuine pleasure at seeing her. "Anwyn, I was hoping you might visit. I've been so worried about you. You look exhausted. How is His Majesty's condition?" "Grave," she replied, studying his expression carefully for any sign of deception. "The infection from his battle wound has proven more serious than we initially believed." "I'm sorry to hear that," Edmund said, stepping aside to invite her into his chambers. "Is there anything I can do to help? Any supplies you need? Any assistance with his care?" The offer seemed sincere, but Anwyn noticed something that made her blood run cold. On the table near his window sat a small wooden box, ornately carved with Eastern designs. The lid was slightly ajar, revealing what looked like dried plant material inside, exactly the kind of container that might hold rare and valuable substances like exotic poisons. "What's in the box?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Edmund followed her gaze, and his expression flickered, just for an instant, but long enough for her to catch the flash of panic before he controlled it. "Oh, that? Trade samples from the Eastern merchants. Spices and medicinal herbs that might interest the court physicians. Nothing particularly valuable. May I see them?" Anwyn stepped toward the box before he could refuse. "I'm always interested in new healing materials, especially from distant lands. Actually, I prefer to present them formally to Master Bran." "First," Edmund said quickly, moving to block her path. "Protocol, you understand." But it was too late. She had seen enough to confirm her worst fears. Among the dried materials in the box were the distinctive silver-green leaves of moonbane flowers, the source of the poison that was slowly killing King Rorik. "You," she whispered, the betrayal cutting through her like a blade. "You tried to murder him." Edmund's mask of concern fell away completely, replaced by a cold calculation that she had never seen before. "I had hoped it wouldn't come to this," he said quietly, moving to stand between her and the door. "I genuinely cared for you, Anwyn. I still do. But you forced this choice when you chose him over me." "I never chose anyone over you," she protested, though even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. "I served my king as a healer. You fell in love with him," Edmund interrupted with bitter accuracy. "Don't insult my intelligence by pretending otherwise. I've watched you these past months, seen how you look at him, how you light up when he's near. Did you think I wouldn't notice?" The truth hung between them like a drawn sword. Yes, she had fallen in love with Rorik, though she had tried desperately to deny it even to herself. But that didn't justify treason and murder, even if that were true, she said, backing slowly toward the window. "It doesn't give you the right to commit regicide. King Rorik is a good ruler. The realm prospers under his leadership." "The realm would prosper under different leadership as well," Edmund replied, coldly. "Leadership that understands the value of strategic alliances with neighboring kingdoms rather than costly wars. King Aldrich offered generous terms for peace terms that Rorik rejected out of pride." "You're working with Aldrich," Anwyn realized, with growing horror. "This whole courtship, everything between us, it was all part of a plan to get close to the king." "Not everything," Edmund said, and for a moment his expression softened. "My feelings for you were genuine. I had hoped to win your affection honestly, to make you my wife and bring you with me when I claimed my reward for eliminating Rorik. We could have had a good life together in Aldrich's court. Your reward?" The pieces fell together with sickening clarity. "You're not just a spy, you're an assassin. How long have you been planning this?" 2 years, Edmund admitted with something like pride. It took that long to establish my position at court, to gain Rorik's trust, to learn his habits and weaknesses. The plan was originally much simpler, a blade in the back during one of his private rides, made to look like bandits. But then you arrived, and everything became more complicated. Because I could keep him healthy enough to be difficult to kill. Because I fell in love with his healer, Edmund corrected with bitter irony. And because he clearly fell in love with her as well. I couldn't simply eliminate him and hope to win you. I had to find a way to remove him that would leave you grateful rather than vengeful. So you chose poison that would look like a natural death from his war wound, Anwyn said, her mind still reeling from the scope of his betrayal. You thought I would turn to you for comfort in my grief. It would have worked, Edmund said with growing agitation. If you hadn't been so skilled, so determined to save him, the poison would have run its course and appeared to be a tragic consequence of battle. I would have been there to support you through your loss, and eventually you would have come to rely on me. But I discovered the truth, Anwyn said, edging closer to the window. If she could get it open, she might be able to call for help before Edmund could stop her. Yes, he replied grimly. Which presents us both with a problem. I can't allow you to reveal what you've learned, and you can't simply walk away knowing what you know. The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Anwyn's hand found the window latch behind her, but Edmund was too close and too alert for her to have any hope of escape. Her only chance lay in keeping him talking while she tried to think of a plan. There's still time to stop this, she said desperately. Tell me how to counter the poison and help me save him. We can find a way to explain your involvement claim. You were coerced, threatened. There is no antidote, Edmund said flatly. And even if there were, I've come too far to turn back now. King Aldric's armies are already moving to take advantage of Rorik's death. By the time the poison runs its course, it will be too late to organize effective resistance. Then you've doomed thousands of innocent people to war and suffering for your own ambition, Anwyn said, her voice heavy with disgust. I've secured peace through the only means available, Edmund replied coldly. Rorik's pride and stubborn honor would have led to decades of conflict. At least this way, the transition of power can be relatively bloodless. The casual dismissal of King Rorik's life and the lives of everyone who would die in the conquest that would follow revealed the depth of Edmund's betrayal. This wasn't passion or desperation driving him, but calculated ambition wrapped in the justification of political necessity. I won't let you succeed, Anwyn said with quiet determination. You don't have a choice, Edmund replied, his hand moving to the sword at his side. I'm truly sorry it's come to this, Anwyn. I had hoped we could find another way. But as he stepped forward with deadly intent, Anwyn realized that she did have one advantage he hadn't considered. She knew things about healing and herbalism that even the most sophisticated assassin might overlook. And if there was no known antidote to moonbane poison, perhaps it was time to create one. The question was whether she could survive the next few minutes long enough to try. Anwyn's mind raced as Edmund's hand closed around his sword hilt. In that moment of mortal danger, her mother's voice echoed in her memory with startling clarity. When death stalks the healing tent, remember that the greatest weapon against poison is not found in any book. It lies in understanding the balance between life and death that flows through all living things. Elena had been speaking of a legendary plant, one that existed more in healers' folklore than documented medicine. The phoenix herb so named because it was said to grow only from the ashes of other poisonous plants, transforming death into life through some mysterious alchemy of nature. Most healers dismissed it as myth, but Elena had believed otherwise. You're making a mistake, Anwyn said quietly, her hand inching toward the small pouch of emergency supplies she always carried. Among the dried herbs and tinctures was a sample she had never expected to use, a cutting from a plant that Master Aldrich in Greyhill had given her on her deathbed, claiming it was the last of its kind and too precious to waste on common ailments. The only mistake I made was falling in love with a woman whose loyalty belongs to another man, Edmund replied, drawing his blade halfway from its sheath. But even that can be corrected. Wait, Anwyn said, pulling the small wrapped bundle from her pouch. Before you do something irreversible, let me show you something. If I'm going to die anyway, I want you to understand what you're truly destroying. Edmund paused, curiosity warring with urgency in his expression. What is it? Phoenix herb, she said, unwrapping the dried cutting with reverent care. The mythical antidote to all poisons, including moonbane. I've carried this for months, never believing I would need it. Impossible, Edmund breathed, but she could see doubt creeping into his eyes. Phoenix herb is a legend. No such plant exists. Look at it, Anwyn insisted, holding the cutting toward him. The dried leaves had an unusual silver-green coloration that seemed to shift in the light, and even in its dormant state, the plant emanated a faint, sweet fragrance that spoke of life and renewal. Feel its energy. This is what could save King Rorik, if I had the chance to prepare it properly. Edmund stared at the herb with growing alarm. If such an antidote truly existed, his carefully planned assassination would fail, and his own life would be forfeit for treason. Give it to me, he demanded, reaching for the cutting. No, Anwyn said, pulling it back and moving toward the window. If you want to ensure the king's death, you'll have to kill me and destroy this herb. But think carefully, Master Bren knows I came here. When he finds my body in your chambers, along with evidence of moonbane, how will you explain that? Your careful plans for a peaceful transition will collapse into bloody investigation and retribution. The logic gave Edmund pause, but only for a moment. Then we'll both disappear, he decided grimly. You'll die of grief after failing to save your beloved king, and I'll be found tragically murdered while trying to comfort you. Very romantic. Really, but Anwyn was already moving, throwing herself toward the window with desperate strength. Her shoulder hit the glass with enough force to shatter it, sending shards cascading into the courtyard below, along with her voice raised in desperate alarm. Guards! Treason! The king has been poisoned. Edmund lunged after her, his sword clearing its sheath with a metallic ring. But the commotion had already attracted attention. Running footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, and voices shouted orders as the castle's defenses responded to her cry. You've doomed us both, Edmund snarled, grabbing her arm and pulling her back from the window. Blood ran from cuts on her hands and face where the glass had struck, but she clutched the phoenix, herb cutting protectively against her chest. I've saved my king, she replied with fierce satisfaction, and I've exposed you for the traitor you are. The chamber door burst open to admit Captain Marcus and 4 of the royal guard, their weapons drawn and their faces grim with purpose. Edmund still held his sword, but against such odds, resistance would be suicidal. Drop your weapon, Captain Marcus commanded, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had never been disobeyed. Sir Edmund Blackwood, you are accused of high treason against the crown. You have no proof, Edmund said desperately, but his words lacked conviction. The evidence was overwhelming: the box of moonbane, his drawn sword, Anwyn's obvious injuries and accusations. We have sufficient proof to hold you for questioning, Marcus replied coldly. And if His Majesty dies from poison, your trial will be very brief indeed. As the guards moved to restrain Edmund, Anwyn pushed past them with single-minded determination. I need to get to the king immediately, she said, still clutching the precious herb cutting. If this is truly Phoenix herb, I may be able to save him, but time is critical. Go, Captain Marcus ordered. Detailed 2 guards to escort her. We'll handle the prisoner. Racing through the castle corridors with her escorts flanking her, Anwyn's mind was already focused on the challenge ahead. Even if the phoenix herb was genuine, she had never prepared it before and had only her mother's cryptic notes to guide her. The process would require perfect precision. Too little, and it would have no effect. Too much, and it might prove as deadly as the poison it was meant to counter. She burst into the royal chambers to find Master Brennan and 2 other physicians, maintaining their vigil over the king's increasingly critical condition. Rorik's breathing was so shallow as to be barely visible, and his skin had taken on the grayish pallor that indicated the poison was nearing its final stages. "Master Brennan," she called urgently, "clear the room except for yourself. I need absolute quiet and no distractions for what I'm about to attempt." The chief physician took one look at her torn clothing, bloodied hands, and fierce expression, then immediately began ushering the other doctors from the chamber. "What do you need?" he asked as soon as they were alone. "Fire, clean water, and your most delicate measuring scales," Anwyn replied, unwrapping the phoenix herb, cutting with hands that trembled only slightly. "I'm going to attempt something that exists more in legend than medical fact." "Phoenix herb," Master Brennan breathed, recognizing the distinctive appearance of the mythical plant. "Where did you never mind? Tell me what you need me to do." Working with desperate efficiency, Anwyn began the most critical preparation of her life. According to her mother's notes, phoenix herb had to be prepared in precise stages, first ground to powder in a mortar made from volcanic glass, then steeped in water heated to exactly the temperature of human blood, finally combined with 3 drops of the patient's own blood to create the mystical connection between the antidote and the person it was meant to save. "The ratios must be perfect," she murmured as she worked, measuring the precious powder with scales sensitive enough to detect the weight of a single grain. Too little, and it won't bind to the poison molecules. Too much, and it will attack the body's natural defenses. Master Brennan assisted with the skill of a master craftsman, anticipating her needs and maintaining the precise conditions required for each stage of the preparation. As they worked, he kept one eye on the king's condition, noting the slight changes that indicated time was running out. "His pulse is becoming irregular," he reported quietly. "Whatever you're doing, it needs to happen soon." "Almost ready," Anwyn replied, adding the final drops of the king's blood to the mixture and watching as it transformed from pale green to deep silver, the sign, according to legend, that the antidote was properly activated. But as she lifted the goblet containing their last hope, doubt assailed her. What if the legends were wrong? What if phoenix herb was indeed just myth, and she was about to administer a final poison to the man she loved? What if Edmund had been right about there being no antidote, and she was simply prolonging Rorik's suffering? "Anwyn," Master Brennan said gently, seeming to sense her hesitation, "your mother trained you well, and your instincts have never failed before. Trust in your knowledge and your heart." Taking a deep breath, Anwyn knelt beside the king's bed and carefully lifted his head. "Forgive me if I'm wrong," she whispered, then slowly poured the silver liquid between his lips, massaging his throat gently to help him swallow. For long minutes, nothing happened. Rorik's breathing remained shallow, his skin remained gray, and his pulse continued its irregular pattern. Anwyn felt despair beginning to creep into her heart. Perhaps the legends had been false after all, and she had simply administered a meaningless potion to a dying man. Then, so subtly that she almost missed it, his breathing deepened. The grayish pallor began to fade from his skin, replaced by a faint flush of returning life. His pulse, when she checked it again, had steadied into a stronger, more regular rhythm. "It's working," Master Brennan said in wonder, checking the king's vital signs with practiced efficiency. "His body is responding. The poison's effects are actually reversing." Anwyn sank into the chair beside the bed, exhaustion and relief washing over her in equal measure. The immediate crisis was passing, but Rorik would need careful monitoring for hours yet to ensure the antidote continued its work. And beyond that lay the larger questions of Edmund's treason, the extent of the conspiracy, and the political ramifications of an attempted regicide. But for now, it was enough that the man she loved was going to live. The phoenix herb had proved real. Her mother's wisdom had guided her true, and justice would have its chance to prevail. As she settled in for what would undoubtedly be a long night of vigilant care, Anwyn allowed herself to hope that the worst was finally behind them. Dawn was breaking over the castle walls when King Rorik's eyes finally opened, clear and focused. For the first time in days, Anwyn, who had maintained her vigil through the long night, felt her heart leap with relief and joy as his steel-gray gaze found hers across the dimly lit chamber. "Anwyn," he said, his voice hoarse but strong. "What happened? I remember the victory celebration, then everything becomes ... unclear." "You were poisoned, Your Majesty," she replied, moving to check his pulse and finding it steady and strong. "Moonbane extract in your wine cup. The assassin wanted your death to appear natural, a complication from your battle wound." Rorik's expression darkened as the implications became clear. "An assassin within my own court. Do we know who?" The question she had been dreading had finally come. Anwyn took a steady breath, preparing to deliver news that would shake the foundations of trust that held the kingdom together. "Sir Edmund Blackwood," she said quietly. "He confessed to me yesterday when I discovered the evidence in his chambers. He's been working with King Aldrich for 2 years, positioned here to eliminate you when the moment was right." The betrayal hit Rorik like a physical blow. Edmund had been more than just a courtier. He had been a trusted advisor, someone that King had relied upon for counsel and friendship. To learn that it had all been an elaborate deception was devastating on both personal and political levels. 2 years, Rorik repeated slowly, his mind clearly working through the implications. How much damage has he done? What secrets has he passed to our enemies? What other plans might be in motion even now? "Captain Marcus has him in custody," Anwyn assured him, "and the immediate threat has been neutralized. But Your Majesty, there's something else you need to know." Edmund claimed that King Aldrich's armies are already moving to take advantage of your expected death. If that's true, then we're facing invasion while our enemies believe us to be leaderless and unprepared, Rorik finished grimly. He struggled to sit up, his movements still careful, but showing remarkable improvement from the near-death state of the previous day. "How long was I unconscious?" 3 days since the poison began taking effect, Anwyn replied, gently supporting his efforts to rise. "Your recovery is miraculous. Phoenix herb is even more powerful than the legends claimed. But Your Majesty, you need to rest and regain your strength before facing the greatest crisis of my reign," Rorik interrupted with a wan smile. "I'm afraid rest will have to wait, my dear healer. If Aldrich's forces are indeed approaching our borders, every hour of delay costs us strategic advantage." Despite her medical concerns, Anwyn recognized the logic of his position. A king who had been believed dead, reappearing to lead his forces, would have enormous psychological impact, not only on his own people, but on the enemy forces who had counted on his absence. "At least let me examine you properly," she insisted. "The antidote has countered the poison, but your body has been through tremendous stress. I need to ensure you're truly fit for the demands ahead." Rorik submitted to her examination with patient grace, and Anwyn was amazed by what she found. Not only had the phoenix herb neutralized the moonbane poison, but it seemed to have enhanced his natural healing abilities. The old battle scar that had troubled him for years showed no sign of inflammation. His muscle tone was better than she had seen it in months, and his energy levels appeared to be completely restored. "Remarkable," she murmured, completing her assessment. "It's as if the herb didn't just cure the poison, it optimized your entire physical condition. I've never seen anything like it." "Then perhaps the legends were right about more than just its antidote properties," Rorik observed. Phoenix herb was said to not merely heal, but to transform, to burn away weakness and leave only strength behind. A commotion in the corridor outside interrupted their discussion. Heavy footsteps and urgent voices suggested the word of the king's recovery was already spreading through the castle. Moments later, Captain Marcus appeared in the doorway, his usually composed expression showing relief and concern in equal measure. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing deeply, "thank the gods you recovered. We have urgent reports from the border scouts. King Aldric's army is indeed approaching, larger than our initial estimates suggested. They're moving in 3 columns, clearly expecting to find us unprepared and demoralized." "How long before they reach our outer defenses?" Rorik asked, his mind already shifting into tactical mode. 2 days, perhaps 3 if the weather turns bad," Marcus replied. "But your Majesty, there's more. We've been questioning Sir Edmund, and he's revealed details of the conspiracy that go far beyond simple assassination. Aldric has been planning this invasion for over a year. The poison plot was meant to remove our leadership at the critical moment." "What else has he told you?" Anwyn asked, though she dreaded the answer. "There are other agents in place throughout the kingdom," Marcus continued grimly. "Saboteurs positioned to strike at our supply lines, communications, and key defensive positions. Edmund claims he doesn't know all their identities. His contact with Aldric's network was limited to preserve operational security." The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. What had seemed like a simple assassination attempt was actually part of a comprehensive plan to destroy Einhold's ability to resist invasion. Even with Rorik alive and the immediate plot failed, they still faced enemies within their own borders, working to ensure Aldric's victory. "Summon the War Council," Rorik commanded, his voice carrying the authority that had never faltered even in his weakest moments. "Alert all unit commanders to prepare for immediate mobilization, and send word to our border fortresses there to begin harassment of Aldric's columns immediately, but avoid decisive engagement until we arrive with the main force." "Your Majesty," Anwyn interjected carefully, "are you certain you're ready for active campaigns so soon after?" "I'm ready," Rorik said firmly, but then his expression softened as he turned to her. "Thanks to your skill and courage, I'm not just alive, I'm stronger than I've been in years. But I'll need you with me again, Anwyn. Not just as my healer, but as the person I trust most in this world." The words sent warmth flooding through her chest, but they also brought a sharp awareness of the dangers that lay ahead. The coming battle would test everything they had built together, their professional partnership, their growing personal bond, and their shared commitment to protecting the realm they both served. "I'll be ready," she promised, then hesitated before adding, "Your Majesty, about Edmund ... I know his betrayal must be painful on a personal level. He was someone you trusted, someone you considered a friend." "He was," Rorik acknowledged quietly. "And that makes his treachery more than just political. It's a reminder that in my position, trust is both the most valuable and most dangerous gift I can give. But his betrayal has also shown me something precious, that there are people whose loyalty is absolute, whose courage is unshakable, and whose love." He paused, the unfinished words hanging between them like a bridge neither had quite dared to cross. "Your Majesty?" Anwyn prompted softly. "Whose love gives me strength beyond anything I thought possible," he finished, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "We'll speak more of this when the immediate crisis has passed. But know this, whatever comes in the battle ahead, I face it with complete confidence because you'll be at my side." As Captain Marcus hurried away to carry out his orders and the castle erupted into controlled chaos of war preparations, Anwyn felt the weight of destiny settling around them. The phoenix herb had saved Rorik's life, but the true test of their bond and the realm's survival lay in the days ahead. The assassin's plot had failed, but the invasion it was meant to enable was still coming. And somewhere in the approaching enemy army rode King Aldric himself, confident that his careful plans would deliver victory despite the unexpected survival of his primary target. He would learn soon enough that some transformations once begun could not be stopped, and that the phoenix herb had done more than simply heal a poisoned king god. It had forged him into something stronger than before. The confrontation came at dawn on the third day, as mist rose from the valley floor where two armies faced each other across a field that would soon be remembered in songs and stories. King Rorik sat his destrier at the center of Ironhold's battle line, his presence radiating the kind of confidence that turned ordinary soldiers into heroes. The crown of truth, the simple circlet of gold that marked his authority, caught the first rays of sunlight as he surveyed the enemy forces arrayed against them. King Aldric had indeed brought a formidable army, but Anwyn could see the shock rippling through the enemy ranks as they recognized the figure they had believed dead. The psychological impact of Rorik's appearance was immediate and devastating. Commanders could be seen frantically passing messages, and the precise formations that had advanced so confidently began to show signs of uncertainty. He didn't expect to face me, Rorik observed quietly to Anwyn, who rode beside him in the position traditionally reserved for the king's most trusted advisor. Aldric's entire strategy was built around my death and the resulting chaos. Now he must improvise, and desperate men make poor tactical decisions. Anwyn nodded, though her attention was divided between the approaching battle and her patience. Condition. The phoenix herb had indeed worked miracles, but she remained vigilant for any sign that the stress of command might affect his recovery. So far, he showed no weakness. If anything, he seemed more vital and energetic than she had ever seen him. "Your Majesty," Captain Marcus reported, riding up from the left flank. "Our scouts confirmed that Aldric himself leads the center column. He's positioned himself where he can see the entire battlefield, and where he can retreat quickly if things go badly. Then let's ensure they go very badly indeed," Rorik replied with grim satisfaction. "Signal the archers to begin ranging shots. I want Aldric to understand what he's truly facing before we close with them." The battle that followed was unlike anything Anwyn had ever imagined. She had thought war would be chaos and confusion, but under Rorik's command, it became something closer to a deadly dance. Units moved with precision across the field, each maneuver calculated to maximum advantage. Every charge timed to perfection. From her position behind the main battle line, Anwyn watched as Rorik's forces systematically dismantled Aldric's army. The enemy had numbers, but Einhold's troops had better training, superior leadership, and the unshakable morale that came from following a king they believed could not be killed. When the moment came for the final charge, the decisive push that would shatter Aldric's center and end the invasion, Rorik turned to her with an expression of fierce determination tempered by something softer. "This ends today," he said. "Whatever Edmund and Aldric had planned dies with their army's defeat. But before I lead the charge, there's something I need you to know." "Your Majesty?" "I love you," he said simply, the words carrying absolute conviction despite the chaos of battle surrounding them. Not as king to subject, not as patient to healer, but as a man loves a woman who has become essential to his very existence. "I needed you to hear that before nothing," Anwyn interrupted fiercely. "You're coming back from this charge, alive and whole, and we're going to have a very long conversation about what those words mean for both of us." Rorik's answering smile was brilliant with joy and determination. "Yes, we are. Hold that thought, my love." With that, he spurred his destrier forward, leading the charge that would decide the fate of kingdoms. Anwyn watched him thunder across the field at the head of his knights, a figure of legendary power cutting through enemy lines like a force of nature itself. The battle's climax was swift and decisive. Aldric's forces, already shaken by their king's survival and demoralized by the systematic destruction of their carefully laid plans, crumbled before the final assault. Within minutes, the enemy army was in full retreat, leaving behind weapons, supplies, and any hope of conquest. But the most satisfying moment came when King Aldrich himself was brought before Rorik in chains, his arrogant confidence replaced by the hollow expression of a man who had gambled everything and lost. The confrontation between the two sovereigns took place in Rorik's command pavilion, with only essential witnesses present. "You should have stayed dead," Aldrich said with bitter hatred. "My plans were perfect. Edmund assured me that the poison would work, that your death would appear natural." "Your plans failed because they were built on treachery and betrayal," Rorik replied calmly. "You underestimated the loyalty of those who serve from love rather than fear, and you failed to account for the healing power of true devotion." Aldrich's gaze shifted to Anwyn with obvious confusion. "The village healer? She's the one who saved you." "She's the one who saved us all," Rorik corrected firmly. "And she's far more than just a healer, though you would never understand that. The justice that followed was swift but fair. Aldrich would live, but as a prisoner whose kingdom would be governed by regents until a suitable heir could be established. Edmund and the other conspirators faced harsher fates. Treason against the crown carried only one penalty, though Rorik showed mercy in making their executions quick and clean. As evening fell over the battlefield and the immediate crisis passed into history, Anwyn found herself walking with Rorik through the camp where their victorious soldiers celebrated around carefully controlled fires. The crown of truth had been set aside for the moment, and he was simply a man walking with the woman he loved. "So," he said eventually, breaking the comfortable silence between them, "we promised ourselves a long conversation about what my declaration means for both of us." "We did," Anwyn agreed, stopping beside a stream that ran clear and cold through the valley. "Though I think the answer is simpler than either of us wants to admit." "Oh, I love you too," she said quietly, the words feeling both momentous and perfectly natural. "I have for months, though I tried to deny it because loving a king seemed like the height of foolishness for someone like me." "Someone like you?" Rorik repeated with gentle mockery. "You mean someone brilliant, courageous, loyal, and beautiful? Someone who saved my life and helped save my kingdom? Yes, I can see how loving such a woman would be complete foolishness." "I'm not beautiful," Anwyn protested automatically, the old insecurities rising despite everything that had changed. "You are to me," Rorik said firmly, taking her hands in his. "You are the most beautiful woman I have ever known, because your beauty comes from your spirit, your compassion, your strength. And you are the only woman I want to share my throne and my life with." The proposal was implicit but unmistakable. Anwyn felt tears gathering in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming joy of a dream she had never dared to dream coming true. "Are you asking me to marry you?" she said, needing to hear the words spoken clearly. "I'm asking you to be my queen," Rorik replied, "to stand beside me as we build a kingdom worthy of the love we found together, to heal not just my body but my heart, and to let me do the same for you." "Yes," she whispered, then louder, with all the conviction in her heart. "Yes, I will marry you. I will be your queen and your partner in all things." When he kissed her there beside the stream, with the stars beginning to emerge overhead and the sounds of celebration echoing across the valley, Anwyn understood that her transformation was complete. The woman who had been dismissed as worthless in Greyhill Square had become someone who would be crowned queen of the realm. But more importantly, she had become someone who knew her own worth, not because a king had recognized it, but because she had finally learned to see herself clearly. The kiss deepened, and for a moment the weight of crowns and kingdoms fell away, leaving only two people who had found something rare and precious in each other. When they finally broke apart, Both were breathing hard and smiling with the kind of joy that comes from surviving impossible odds together. "There will be challenges ahead," Rorik said practically, though his arms remained around her. "Court, politics, diplomatic complexities, the simple fact that some will question your suitability for the throne. Let them question," Anwyn replied with confidence that surprised even her. "I've learned that worthiness isn't determined by birth or appearance. It's earned through actions, proven through character, and validated by results. Anyone who doubts that can speak with the people I've healed, the soldiers whose lives I've saved, or the king whose life I've helped preserve." "My fierce queen," Rorik murmured with obvious admiration. "I think our kingdom is about to discover what real strength looks like." They stood together beside the stream for long minutes, processing the magnitude of what they had survived and what lay ahead. The assassination plot had been thwarted, the invasion defeated, and justice served. But beyond those immediate victories lay the deeper transformation that had occurred. Two people who had found in each other not just love, but partnership, understanding, and the kind of mutual respect that could sustain them through whatever trials the future might bring. "We should return to the camp," Rorik said eventually, though he seemed reluctant to break the spell of the moment. "There will be reports to review, prisoners to question, and plans to make for consolidating our victory." "Of course," Anwyn agreed, then smiled with newfound confidence. "Though I suspect that from now on, your queen will have opinions about some of those plans." "I'm counting on it," Rorik replied warmly. "A wise king surrounds himself with advisors who aren't afraid to speak truth to power. A smart king marries one." As they walked back toward the pavilions, where torches burned bright against the darkness, Anwyn reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the shame of public humiliation to the triumph of saving a kingdom, it seemed impossible that so much could change in so short a time. But perhaps that was the true magic of the Phoenix herb. It didn't just heal physical ailments. It revealed the potential for transformation that existed within everyone. The crown of truth waited in Rorik's pavilion, its simple gold circle catching the firelight as they entered. Soon there would be another crown, one crafted specifically for the woman who would stand beside him as his equal partner in ruling the realm. But for tonight, it was enough to know that love had triumphed over treachery, that loyalty had proven stronger than ambition, and that sometimes the most powerful healing came not from herbs or medicines, but from the recognition of true worth. That had always been there, waiting to be discovered. The conspiracy was ended, the invasion defeated, and justice served. But the greatest victory was simpler and more profound. Two people had found each other across the vast divide of rank and station, and in doing so had discovered that real love recognizes no boundaries save those created by fear and prejudice. Those barriers had been shattered as completely as King Aldric's army, leaving behind only the bright promise of a future built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the kind of love that transforms not just individuals, but entire kingdoms. 6 months later, autumn painted the castle gardens in brilliant shades of gold and crimson as Anwyn stood before the mirror in her chambers, adjusting the crown that had been crafted especially for her coronation as queen. The circlet was elegant in its simplicity, white gold woven with delicate patterns of healing herbs, set with stones that caught the light like captured stars. It was beautiful, but more importantly, it represented something she had never thought possible: recognition not as a burden to be tolerated, but as a treasure to be celebrated. "Your Majesty," Master Alwyn said from the doorway, his tone carrying the genuine respect that had replaced his initial skepticism, "the ceremony guests have assembled. King Rorik awaits your presence in the Great Hall." "Thank you, Master Alwyn," Anwyn replied, turning from the mirror with a smile. "And please, after today, we'll be ruling partners. I hope you'll feel comfortable offering counsel to us both." The elderly steward's face cracked into what might have been his first genuine smile in decades. "It will be my honor, your majesty. The realm is fortunate indeed to have found such a queen." As they walked through the castle corridors toward the great hall, Anwyn marveled at how much had changed since that humiliating day in Greyhill Square. The walls were decorated with flowers and banners in celebration of the royal wedding that would immediately follow her coronation. But more significantly, they displayed portraits of the kingdom's healers men and women whose knowledge and dedication had been formally recognized and honored at the new queen's insistence. The great hall was packed with representatives from across the realm and beyond. Nobles who had initially questioned her suitability now stood ready to pledge their loyalty to a queen who had proven her worth through actions rather than bloodline. Foreign dignitaries had traveled great distances to witness the coronation of the woman whose healing skills had become legendary throughout the known world. But the face that mattered most was waiting at the Alpha King Rorik, resplendent in ceremonial armor that bore the scars of real battle, his steel-gray eyes bright with love and pride as she approached. Beside him stood Master Brennan, holding the ancient healing tome that would serve as one of the symbols of her authority. The tradition was new, established specifically to honor the knowledge and wisdom she brought to the throne. "My lords and ladies," the ceremonial herald announced in a voice that carried to every corner of the hall, "we gather today to witness the coronation of Queen Anwyn, whose courage in battle, wisdom in council, and skill in healing have proven her worthy to share the throne of our beloved sovereign." The ceremony that followed was both solemn and joyful, combining ancient traditions with new elements that reflected the unique nature of Anwyn's path to the crown. When Rorik placed the circlet upon her head, his hands lingered on her face with obvious tenderness. "You are my queen," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "Not by right of birth, but by right of merit. Not by chance of fortune, but by choice of love. And not as my lesser partner, but as my equal in all things." The vows they exchanged afterward were their own creation, promising not just fidelity and honor, but mutual respect, shared purpose, and dedication to serving the realm together. When the ceremony concluded, and they turned to face their subjects as king and queen, the cheer that erupted shook the very foundations of the castle. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came later, during the private celebration that followed. The public ceremony. Among the gifts presented to the new queen was a letter bearing the seal of Greyhill village, a formal apology from the people who had dismissed her for so many years, along with a request that she accept the title of patron saint of their local healers guild. "They want to name the new healing school after you," Rorik observed, reading over her shoulder. "The Anwyn Institute for Traditional Medicine. It has a nice sound to it." "It feels strange," Anwyn admitted, folding the letter carefully. "To be honored by people who once saw me as nothing more than a burden." "People change when they're given the chance to see clearly," Rorik replied wisely. "Your father, for instance." Indeed, Gareth had surprised everyone by traveling to the capital for the wedding, sober for the first time in years and bearing a gift that brought tears to Anwyn's eyes, her mother's wedding ring, carefully preserved and finally offered with the blessing he should have given long ago. Elena would be so proud, he had whispered during their emotional reunion. "I was a fool, daughter. Can you forgive an old man his blindness?" The reconciliation had been healing for both of them, proving that transformation was possible, even for relationships that seemed irreparably broken. As the evening wound down and the last guest departed, Anwyn and Rorik found themselves alone in the royal chambers that were now truly theirs to share. The crown sat on its stand nearby, catching moonlight from the windows that looked out over the kingdom they would rule together. "Any regrets?" Rorik asked as they settled by the fireplace, finally able to speak freely without the weight of ceremony and public scrutiny. "Only one," Anwyn replied, then smiled at his expression of concern. I regret that it took so long for me to understand my own worth. I wasted years believing what others said about me, instead of trusting what I knew to be true about myself. And what do you know to be true now? He asked, drawing her closer. That worth isn't measured by appearance or birth or others' approval, she said with the quiet confidence of hard-won wisdom. It's measured by the good we do, the love we give, and the courage we show when facing impossible odds. I know that I'm a skilled healer, a loyal friend, and a woman capable of standing as equal partner to a king. And I know that sometimes the most beautiful transformations come not from changing who we are, but from finally accepting who we've always been, she finished, leaning into his embrace. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low while the kingdom settled into peaceful sleep around them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The work of governing was never finished, and there would always be those who needed healing, conflicts that required resolution, and dreams that demanded the courage to pursue them. But tonight, they were simply a man and woman who had found love against impossible odds, whose story would be told for generations as proof that true worth could not be hidden forever. And that sometimes the most powerful magic in the world was the simple recognition that everyone deserved to be seen clearly and valued truly. The transformation was complete, but the real journey, the adventure of building a kingdom and a life together, was just beginning. And as Anwyn drifted off to sleep wearing her crown and her husband's arms around her, she knew with absolute certainty that the best was yet to come. In the distance, church bells tolled midnight, marking the end of a day that had changed everything, and the beginning of a future bright with possibility. The woman who had once been dismissed as worthless had become a queen, not through magic or miracle, but through the simple truth that had been there all along. She had always been exactly as valuable as she believed herself to be. The only difference was that now, finally, she believed it too.